what's the function then of a neighbourhood? That's not so clear. It's not a thought that most people are going around carrying in their heads. But actually, neighbourhoods do have functions. And tonight, we want to share those 7 functions. So, I want to be careful here because there's always the great danger that when you're excited about something, and I love community, it's in my heart, that you can come across as a bit of an evangelist or, an ideological kind of person. So I thought that I would try to deal with the first 3 functions which we're going to talk about tonight. And those functions are the functions of our local economy, security and health. You're 4 times more likely to be able to find a sustainable livelihood if you live in a connected community. So it's not what you know, it's who you know, or more to the point, who you know, who knows, who you need to know, that gets you the job or gets you the opportunity so that you feel productive. And every human being has gifts to contribute to the well-being of the community. And one of the things that we absolutely, I think, really have to do, and Kelly and Peter and the Iveagh Trust and others, I think, really invest in, is this idea that we can't talk about community development without also talking about economic justice, and particularly at the moment, as we think about what families are going through tonight and indeed as the winter goes on. But as well as understanding that neighbourhoods, that communities have a profoundly important role to play when it comes to wealth generation, and of course credit unions are the preeminent example of what I'm talking about here, where we can keep our wealth captured and keep it circulating around our local economy so it serves our community. Such an obvious point, but so easy to miss unless we actually lift it up and we foreground it. Security. Often it's interesting, I think people think, well, our security is in the hands of police. If we have more police, we have more security. If we have more CCTV cameras, we are safer. Well, actually, the evidence doesn't bear this out at all, with all due respect to our officers, and I think they'll know this tonight, that what determines how safe our neighbourhoods are 2 main things, primarily. The first is how many neighbours we know by first name. And the second is how often we associate with those neighbours in the built environment, doing things together to make our community connected, stronger and safer. Now that doesn't mean that police are not important, of course they are, but they're supplementary. They add value, they extend to our capacity. So we can never ever have enough police in the absence of connected communities. Robert Sampson is the preeminent social scientist who has studied this all over the world. I'm drawing on his research rather than my opinion. And again, I want to stick with the facts. So just for this portion of the talk, I'm going to be a factivist rather than an activist and try and stick with the evidence. Nowhere is the evidence stronger about the importance of connected community than with respect to health. Often we think about health in medical terms, but actually health has so much more to do with our social and our political lives than it does with our medical well-being. Only 15% of what determines our health and well-being has anything got to do with medicine. 85% of our health and well-being is determined by our community assets, by our own lifestyles, by our connections to our associations, by our economic circumstances, and by our environment. And again, the Iveagh Trust know this. So one of the things I think that's really important also to recognise about health is that if you're not a member of a club or a group and you join a member, you're statistically reducing your chances of dying next year by 50%. There is no known drug that is better for your health than community. We have Jerry McGuigan with us tonight from Crumlin, and Jerry has dedicated his life to being alongside young men and women playing football because he recognises that as well as them being the future of Crumlin, also that connection, that vibrancy in sport is absolutely central to a healthy community. And we have so many other people here tonight who understand that most of what people are doing to be healthy, they're doing while not thinking, I'm doing this to be healthy. We're 27% more likely to be healthy if we're living in a connected community. In the small village of Frome in the county of it is the county of Somerset. In the county of Somerset, over 3 years, they spent a very, very detailed amount of energy and time trying to connect all of the people who were isolated and lonely. And incidentally, the CSO figures for this year tell us that young people between the ages of 18 and 34, 1 in 4 of them are reporting feeling lonely most of the time. We're dealing with social rip here in our fabric, our social fabric. But in this town of Frome, over 3 years, they connected people and deeply connected them into reciprocal relationships. Not in a charity model, where people are needy, but into a really deep community development model where people are needed. And that's a fundamental shift away from treating people as needy to recognizing them as needed. And in that context, they were able to improve people's health outcomes, to ensure that health inequalities were reduced, and at the same time, reducing the demand on accident emergency, in hospitals by 17% in the village of Frome. All the while, in the county of Somerset, demand on admissions for hospital went up by 29%. Can I ask everybody here tonight who is involved in some shape or form in the local economic renewal of their community, involved in health, or in some way involved in safety, either to stand up or, if you can, put your hand up so that we can honour you. Indicate who you are. If you're involved in any of those 3 functions, let us know where you are. Thank you for what you do. Can we all show a little love here? About consuming health or safety. You are the producers of health and safety. So thank you. The 4th function, if we could go on to the next slide, is ecology. Some people may recognize where this photograph was taken. Anybody know where this is? Yeah, some of you recognize it. Good. See, ecology, I think, is such an important function, and looking after and caring for our ecology is so critical. 90% of the energy we use at the moment to light our homes, to fuel our cars, and to put energy in our factories is coming from distant, non-renewable, toxic, and expensive sources. What we're beginning to see, and it's giving us incredible hope, is that there are growing movements around the world which are creating community alternatives to those kinds of energy productions. Local communities are creating an alternative. They're financing and producing clean, local, renewable energy that isn't warmongering, that isn't price gouging, but is actually creating funding and financial revenue, which is then going back into the community so we can invest in our circular economies and keep our euros going around our local communities. Lots of examples, but one of my favourite examples comes from the Hebrides, the Isle of Iveagh, where it's a very small community of 87 people, but they went off-grid. They were early adopters. They went off-grid in, I think it was 2008, and using largely wind. They have a lot of wind to draw on. Largely wind and some solar. They're generating their own energy. They are not reliant on the grid at all. In fact, they're generating so much energy that they're returning energy to the grid, getting paid for it, and then they're investing what they earn into local enterprise. Clubs and groups and associations that are involved in looking after the ecology here tonight. Can you stand up or raise your hand? Let us know who you are, where you are, please. There's more than that, I know. Come on, don't be shy. Can I thank you for all you do, and can we thank them for all they do? I want to also acknowledge that, ecology is a complex thing, so I'm really taken, I suppose, and quite inspired, if I'm being honest, by what I'm seeing in the Irish context. Towns like Westport are really beginning to grasp the nettle, if you like, and are beginning to say that we need to reduce our reliance on cars. And one of the ways of doing that, and our reliance on fossil fuels, it has to be said, but one of the ways of doing that isn't just every household investing in electrical vehicles, because most households can't afford electric vehicles. But what if we started using our village economies and our neighbourhood economies to actually buy as a neighbourhood? So we use the neighbourhood as the primary unit of change. And what they're talking about doing is investing in fleets of electric vehicles, so that people don't have to individually carry the financial burden, but everybody can spread that burden out and then make sure that everybody can get to work or get to wherever they need to get to. Reducing demand on cars, reducing the demand on fossil fuels, and using our smartphones for something really smart for a change, and actually connecting all these things together. Westport, fantastic, but why not here? Why not in your neighbourhood? I think we could have these kinds of initiatives everywhere, all over Ireland, and we can't do it fast enough, given what we're seeing in the world. Some of you may know this gentleman. I think for me, food sovereignty is one of our most pressing challenges. And when I think about the importance of food sovereignty and the idea of making sure that we can grow in-season, non-toxic, locally grown produce, it's such an important way, I think, of pushing back against what's happening in our world and in our environment. And I believe that in particular, Dublin 8 are at the forefront on the international stage at showing what's possible. The Dublin food movement, for me, is one of the best examples of food sovereignty I can think of in the world. Actonor Credit Union with us tonight, is that right? Yes. Again, thank you so much for what you do. And thank you, it has to be said, for everybody that's been involved and continues to be involved in the Grow Your Own, the slow food movements, and other movements that bring food back into our sovereignty. Everywhere we go, we hear people telling us about the youth problem. Well, I want to say very clearly tonight, we don't have a youth problem. We have a village problem. Right? And we need to let our young people know they're not a problem to be solved. You are our greatest gift, is the adults not being able to see their promise. In Shreveport, Louisiana, about a year ago, in a local school, over 3 days, 23 children were arrested. 23 children were arrested in a school. What's happening? On the third night, 40 local dads went to the principal. And they said, we're going to do something here. And they asked the principal if she would be willing to allow them to go on the corridors and be alongside their young people. And literally, overnight, they were able to achieve what the principal couldn't, what the counsellors couldn't, what the teachers couldn't, and what the police couldn't. They were able to love their children back to peace. They didn't use punishment. They didn't use discipline. In fact, what they did use was a lot of dad jokes and high fives. These guys weren't vigilantes. They were vigilant elders that understood it's not enough to praise our young people. Our young people also need productive adults who stand beside them. And don't just see them as needy, but remind them that they're needed. We cannot do this without you, but you can't do it without us either. It really does take a village, and everybody has to show up. And we have a great privilege tonight of having as our Master of Ceremony, Noel. And Noel is a man who does what he does and shows up as he shows up, not because he's paid, but because he cares. He reminds us that care is the freely given gift of the heart. One person to another. You can't buy it. You can't manage it. You can't curricularize it. And you cannot command it. Because care is a gift. And you're a gift. And we thank you. So, it's important to remember that there are many, many people who feel at the edges of our communities, who, because their identity has in some way been disregarded and disrespected, they've been made strangers. Lila Watson, an Aboriginal elder, educator, and activist, used to say to outsiders coming in to help her community, if you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I think that's exactly what we're here to talk about tonight. Working together equitably. All 7 of the functions that we've shared tonight, well, they're like a tapestry, aren't they? They interweave and intermesh. They're not silos that we separate out. We can't talk about health separate from security, separate from food sovereignty. Because in many respects, I think this book says that each of those functions are like a thread. That our communities, our neighbourhoods, our villages, our towns, well, they're like a weaver's loom on which those threads can find meaning, can find proper connection with each other. And here's the thing, we're the weavers. You can't know what a community needs until you first know what a community has. And we start the conversation not with what do you need and how can we help you, but what do you have? What strengths do you have within your community? What are you uniquely placed by connecting with your neighbours to do? And how can we cheer you on and support you to do that? That's the first question. What is it that communities do best? And how can we remove the barriers and support them? And some of that's about resourcing too. But the second question flows and follows on from that. What else could communities do with a little bit of help? But that help has to be on tap, not on top. It's about servant leadership. And then we get to the final question. What do communities need done for them? And the reason that we recommend that sequence is because if you start with the third question first, you will just overshadow and overwhelm the local community assets and functions we've been talking about tonight. But also, and this is something again my grandmother would have said, you can't know what a community needs until you first know what a community has. We're coming to the end of this presentation and to the really interesting part of the evening, which is the conversation. But as we do, I want to acknowledge that of course there are limits to what we can do in community. There are things that we do need to happen outside in. But most of the sustainable change that we really need in our world comes from ground up. Yes, we do have baggage. Yes, there are limits. And yes, there's all kinds of trauma that we need to acknowledge. But on the days when we feel overwhelmed, I would like us to invoke for courage the immortal words of the late Leonard Cohen, who said, "Ring the bells you still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." So let's let some of that affirming light in on the modest, local, ordinary things that we can do together every day, because they are extraordinary. And I don't know about you, but when I look at what our leaders around the world are doing, you know what? I think the proposition to discover, connect, and mobilize the assets in our local neighbourhoods is not so wild a dream. So let's chance our arm on our neighbourhoods.